Good evening, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of GameSense. We're all excited to be here this evening. We hope that you guys are excited to be here watching us talking about robots. First off, we'd like to thank our sponsor. They're Symbotic. I've accidentally worn this shirt 3 weeks in a row, I swear. They're a great sponsor for us, and they allow us to do all the cool things that we do here on GameSense. So check them out if you get a chance. First off, I'd like to introduce everybody here. First off, I'll introduce the woman behind the scenes, Stephanie Morrison, who's doing all the directing tonight. Joining me on air tonight is Ty Trimbley,
Hey guys.
Evan Morrison,
I'm waving,
Naveed
I swear.
Shaffa. Yep, Evan's there, we swear. And our special guest this week, Brandon Holley from Team 125.
125!
All right,
Hey guys.
cool. Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Brandon?
Sure. For those who don't know me, I go by Brando. This is my 15th year in FRC. I started my high school days back with Team 11 in New Jersey. Mort, what's up, guys? And went to college up here in Boston at Northeastern, and I've been with the Neutrons now for 10 years here on 125.
Wow, awesome. Cool. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you. We really appreciate you being here. So just to let everybody know, the show goes until 10 o'clock. After that show, we're going to have a 20 or 30-minute Q&A time where people in the chat, the Twitch chat, can ask questions to us. We'll take the questions that we like and we'll answer them on air. To ask a question in the Twitch chat, just type ! and the letter Q followed by your question, and our chat bot will automatically pick it up and send it to us for a review. So as we get started, we like to say that we don't take ourselves too seriously, and we hope that you don't either. And if you don't like the things that we have to say on air, we dare you to go out there and prove us wrong in the field. This evening, we're taking a look at what makes the playoffs so different from qualification matches in Recycle Rush, and how it shows up in those very, very final elimination matches. We'll also be discussing the effect of third partners and powerhouse alliances, and taking a look at what makes alliances competitive overall. First, though, I'd like to hand it over to Brando, and he'll talk to us a little bit about the week that was. Brando, take it away.
Sure. So, how could we not start talking about week 2 without talking about the talk of the town on 11-14? Obviously, everyone knows the Simbots Hall of Fame team, perennially one of the top 2 or 3 robots every year. But they got shot out of a cannon coming out this year. I don't think anybody expected a team, without a tether to come out and start putting up points the way 11-14 did. The way they used the kind of old school holonomic Kiwi drive, and the way they secure the stack is pretty interesting. Other observations we're looking at now are the way playoff alliances are starting to form, the way teams are starting to figure out how to play the game. Interestingly enough, we have teams looking, to start specializing, which is starting to develop into a pretty interesting overall strategy for first. The different events are turning into different, are using different strategies. We have events using short stacks and cans. We have events where just 2 robots or even 1 robot are just straight up outscoring entire other alliances.
Yeah.
So I think we've got 11-14 going right now. It's pretty incredible.
Oh, yeah.
I think the thing that impresses me most about 11-14, for one, they're head and shoulders above everybody else on the field. Usually, 254 or 987 or one of the other powerhouse teams comes out and they're at least close to being on the same level. And right now, we haven't seen anybody close to these guys. Now, we haven't seen 2056 yet, and we haven't seen 469 yet. So there's still a couple more of the annual powerhouses that haven't shown their hand. But I think what impresses me most is that it's difficult for almost every single team this year to put up 3 stacks a match. And 11-14 does it comfortably, and so comfortably that they can either do 4 or they can completely mess up a stack. They drop an entire
and still get
stack.
3 full stacks.
Yeah, they dropped an entire stack in finals match 2, and they still got 3 stacks up. And that kind of forethought to know that they need that speed gives them an edge. Because you talk about championship eliminations, for example. These guys are playing for championships. the cans in the middle are important, and they're basically putting themselves in a position that as long as they can guarantee that they get at least 2 of the ones off the center, they're almost definitely going to put up more points than you because they're so much faster that they've got time to make mistakes, and they've got time to add on to their score with just plain totes once they are out of cans. So,
Yeah.
And the
yeah,
other
it's
thing
just-
to mention, since the video's at this point right now, is that ramp and how fast they can load even when they're not at the landfill.
Oh man.
They can get a full stack of 6 totes in, we've heard, about 12 seconds. So,
It might sound rude, but can you imagine what went through 148's head when they went through this they've got 3 robots that are tethered and one does active stacking and everything, and then 1114 just like drops a bunch of aluminum on the floor and there's a 6 stack ready for them. Granted it works for their robot, but 1114 was like, yeah, we could do that. We'll just, there you go. Well, I don't see what's so hard.
I think we're going to see a lot of passive ramps, just floating around in the pits as potential third robot add-ons. May have inspired a whole different breed of robot just with that one little simple mechanism.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I mean it's crazy to
definitely.
think that little aluminum ramp is probably no more than 10 pounds, and realistically anybody could build one even without their withholding allowance. They could just go to the event, have somebody go to Home Depot on Thursday, and then rivet this bad boy together. That'd be pretty sick, actually. Now that I think about it, I should probably. I'm gonna go to Home
You should
Depot after
probably
the show. I
start
think
thinking-
actually.
610
I
actually
honestly-
did do that, didn't
Yeah.
they?
they cut a tote in half and used that. It was,
Oh.
yeah, it's pretty cool. But that kind of out of the box thinking, right from the get go, is certainly what sets them apart. I also want to talk about the other side of the North American continent. Central Valley Regional was kind of the other power play event this weekend. And 1678, my buddies from Citrus Circuits, they took top seed there with an all-around dominating performance. Cheesy Poofs were not far behind, but they got really close to getting, I think, five cans up on top of 5 and 6 stacks most of the matches. So that was, that's a foreshadowing, certainly comparable to some of the Dallas play that we saw week 1. And they also employed, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but they employed the same kind of strategy with their third partner, where they basically said, we're good enough with the 2 robots to get us to finals, just those 2 robots on the field. So the third robot, we're going to spend the time to build a center can grabbing device in order to prepare for possible center can wars in the finals and being able to use more than 5 or 6. So that was pretty cool. Week 2, seeing some more of that. Ty, you competed at reading. What did you see there? Because I think the play was a little bit different.
Yeah.
Real quick before you talk, Ty, though, as a New Englander, it's Reading, okay, like the railroad, not like the rainbow. Okay, continue, Ty. Sorry.
So yeah, a lot of us are from Worcester, so we would know that. So at Reading, it was different because this is a game. I think this is a game that's causing a divide. Last year, you had one game piece that you could deal with, and if you could deal with it, then you were pretty good. This year, the game pieces, there's 2 very, very different game pieces to deal with, and additionally, there's also noodles, but I'm going to pretend that those don't exist. And it's hard to figure out how to deal with them effectively. And if you do, you can be pretty good, and if you don't, you're pretty terrible, because this year you can't just push totes around and score a lot of points. But last year you could do assists. So what we found in Reading or Reading or the Rainbow, what we found while we were competing in the Rainbow was that there were a lot of teams there that couldn't handle totes very well, and thus the cooperation stack was huge. Right? Teams were averaging 27 to 50 points a match, and a significant portion of that comes from the cooperation stack. So the most interesting thing we noticed was the number 2 and number 3 seeds decided to pair up, and they were ranked number 2 and 3 because they got a lot of points, but they got a lot of points because they did their cooperation all the time. So what ended up happening was, sorry, what ended up happening is they ended up going out in the eliminations earlier than they expected. So in Reading, it was interesting because we had a lot of teams that couldn't deal with totes, but the few totes they could deal with, they decided to do the most powerful totes, and that ended up coming around to bite them.
Yeah. We'll talk more about that later on. In fact, actually pretty quick, but I think Naveed wants to talk about an event that we didn't really go into too much.
Yeah, I think while we're talking about top performances and differentiating elimination play or playoff play, we have to mention Rock City from this week because we saw the teams and the alliances that were able to put up a ton of points where two robots were really dominant on that first seed alliance, for example, and they would basically own the show. And I think in Rock City, this wasn't really the case. I think a lot of people expected Roboteers and Ponage to go out, or Ponage, however you want to say, Ponage, I think. They were expecting them to go out and just hog the field, but 1625 is their late pick steal. Despite all the issues they had early on in the tournament, by the time playoffs rolled around, they were ready to go, and it was really cool to see three robots that were actually at that rate somewhat close to the same caliber, and the three of them together nearly broke the week one high score from 148 and 987 of 215. Actually, they had a last minute stack that was coming on that they just barely hadn't released from. But seeing that kind of play where they were all on the field, dynamically involved in making the big stacks, was really exciting.
Cool. Actually, Naveed, now that you mentioned that, I kind of want to ask you a question. Do you think that this is the future, or do you think that the 1114s and 254s of first are the future with regard to this season?
I wish, but probably not until we get to District Champs and Worlds, because this week I think we're back to, again, less stacked events for the most part, and we don't have as many of these powerhouse pair-ups, potentially. I think we'll see some strong alliances, but when you get to smaller events, it's harder to find a three-team roster. I know it's not going to happen at Districts, probably until District Champs, just because of the roster not being deep enough for that last pick.
Yeah, I definitely think by the time you get to championship level play, especially because averages are so important to get you to finals, that you're not going to be able to afford to use that third pick on somebody who doesn't actually contribute during 2 minutes of the match. If you're picking them just to be able to get the center cans, that's great, that's fine. At championships, I think we might see this with the fourth robot a bit, that they're going to have sort of specialized picks for the semis and quarters, and then change during the finals. But you can't afford to have somebody not contributing points, because every point's going to count in order to boost those averages. Yeah.
Actually, as we're sort of talking about the playoffs, Ty, you mentioned it a little bit earlier. Why don't we go on a little bit about your analysis of the co-op points and how they sort of affect the rankings and how they play into alliance makeups?
All right, sure. So what I had noticed specifically from Reading when I saw that the 2 and 3 ranked teams paired up and then went out in the quarterfinals was that cooperation, while it can get you to rank high, if you end up picking another team that used cooperation to rank high and you both can't actually score a lot of points without cooperation, then you're in trouble when it comes to the elimination. So what I did is I went through the results and I just picked a few. I tried to remain unbiased by picking teams from the Pacific Northwest and New England.
It's just an overall GameSense bias. It's not actually high bias.
Right. So what I did is, if we can pull that up, I think we have it ready to show, is I went through and I took the qualification average, and then I also looked at the number of co-op points that the team scored and basically calculated the average number of co-op points that they score each time or each match. I then took that away to make an adjusted qualification average. So basically, this is a rough and crude estimate of how many points they're scoring without cooperation each match. And what you see is the 2 and 3 ranked teams in 4905 and 4909 fall to 7 and 5 respectively. And then 1768, which was ranked 1, ended up being ranked 1 the whole time. But then you see a lot of teams jump right up. Like, for example, the 4th ranked team jumps to rank 2. The 5th ranked team jumps to rank 3. The 16th ranked team jumps to rank 4, which happened to be me, but that wasn't the plan.
Interesting data you have here.
But something that I'd also like to point out though is 3499 was ranked 21st at the event. But if you take away the cooperation points, you realize that a significant amount of the points they were scoring were from totes themselves, and they jump up to number 10, but they weren't picked. They weren't picked at all and completely missed the eliminations. So then we went on to the Central Valley Regional. And you'll notice that the adjusted qualification averages are very similar to their regular qualification averages for the top 2 teams. And that's because Team 254 and 1678 only had 1 stack of cooperation happen between them. Then if we go to Greater Toronto, sorry, did someone
actually? But before we go over there, Brando, why don't you tell us a little bit? You were at Reading as well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why you think the rankings ended up being that way, and our adjusted rankings showed something different?
Yeah, I think if you look at what some of these teams are doing, especially at Reading, the 4905s, the 4909s, they're kind of in this weird in between state where they're by no means what you would label as a powerhouse, but they're consistent. Their robots worked. They were able to manipulate totes in a match to match consistent manner. And when you look at that, they're not able to create a 6-stack with a can and go up and put 40 points up, a match. So they're being efficient and they're using, as few movements as possible to take the 40 points on the co-op. So what you end up seeing is, teams ranking fairly high up, and they're not really capable of playing the different game that we get when we get to Elims. It's a completely different game, and so there was some of the Alliance captains at Reading obviously recognized that fact, and they picked teams that were off the radar a bit as far as their ranking, but then they go ahead and they choose, or a few of them chose other co-op teams. And so now you have 2 Alliance members, and this is like the number 2 seed Alliance, I think, that were both really good at co-op, but when you add them together, you weren't getting a huge amount of just tote and stack output. So they were just not able to keep up with some of the other alliances that formed using lower ranked teams. And then you go and you look at CVR, and you've got some of these bigger names who are able to put up those consistent points, those consistent big stacks, 5 and 6s, noodles and cans, and they don't need to rely on the co-op because they can consistently get 100 points doing something else. And I think those are the parity in events that we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. One
absolutely.
thing
Actually,
that I
before we
noticed.
do that, actually, Evan, real quick before we go into that. Why don't we show a little video here for those of you who don't know about looking forward? It's a anonymous individual, quote unquote, that is on Chief Delphi. He gives his or her insight into the week that's coming each week. Gives a little bit of inside information here and there, and they've presented a little video for us. So let's go right into it right away.
Cooperation stacks were a massive factor in seeding during the first 2 weeks, and will likely continue to be throughout the season, with the average match scores just nudging over 50 points. Had massive applications and eliminations. This year, some teams are finding themselves having to adapt on the fly in the playoffs. Cooperation stacks were a massive factor in seeding during the first 2 weeks, and will likely continue to be throughout the season, with the average match scores just nudging over 50 points in Week 2. 40 points still represents the bulk of scoring potential for most seeding rounds. Roughly 30% of all ranking points so far have come via competition. While some top seeds, such as 1024 in Indianapolis and 2481 in Rock City, made competition a staple of their ranking strategies, it's the top tier teams that are often least handcuffed to the Golden Totes in Recycle Rush. For instance, 1678 and 254 ranked first and second respectively at CVR, despite their alliances only getting 40 competition points each during the entire tournament. This is in stark contrast to the Center Bridge in the last Double R game, Rebound Rumble. And whereas balancing on the bridge in 2012 still had massive applications in eliminations, this year some teams are finding themselves having to adapt on the fly in the playoffs.
All right, so we had to replay that again, a little bit of an audio hiccup there, but some really good insight from looking forward. One thing that, it's interesting that the teams that are doing this co-op are usually the ones that are good at pure tote manipulation. And they don't, as Brandon said, they don't necessarily deal with the cans either at all or very well. And so if they're able to figure out a way to do it or ally themselves with somebody who is good at cans during the elimination tournament, it can work out very well for them. And we saw that at Auburn Mountain View district, that the two best co-op teams ended up actually being in the finals against the two teams that were number 1 and number 2 after the after Ty's adjusted qual rankings. But that was because, from a strategic standpoint, they were able to adapt their play. Whereas if that's kind of all you can do and you don't think about that, then it can really hurt you. The other thing that I thought was interesting from the data was that if you compare the regionals to the districts, districts tend to be a lot more co-op heavy in the rankings. And I don't know if that's more because the regionals are generally just a lot deeper, or if it has to do with the fact that the way the district point system works, teams are really prioritizing the ranking and not necessarily the ultimate finish, because there's a lot of points to be gained from ranking high. And so being able to do that co-op, we talked about that a little bit during our first episode, being able to do that co-op and boost yourself in the rankings really does a lot to help you get to the next level of competition at the district championship, even though it's not as valuable. Sorry,
That's
not
true.
as valuable in elims.
Certainly, that's true. But it's interesting to note that according to the spreadsheet here, the top two teams were 1983 and 1318 at the PNW district, both of which didn't really do a lot of co-op.
Well, this is 1318 was the number 6 seed regularly, and they move and the adjustment they moved to number 2 seed specifically because they didn't do the co-op. And both 1318 and 1983 had tried co-op a couple times and were relatively unsuccessful at it. But I think you see that the teams that have designed for eliminations in terms of being able to manipulate the cans and do that all themselves, like 254, like 1114, etc., they're actually getting more value from their time just by doing that in quals matches than they are by doing the co-op. Whereas the teams that are pure tote manipulators or specialists at tote manipulation get more value out of doing the co-op.
Interesting. Naveed, I know that in the first episode of the year, you mentioned that your team was probably going to try to do a lot of co-op. As Evan posited, is that why you're doing that, to try to get your rank up, or
that was the original plan? Strategy has changed now, though. Unless somebody puts out 3 for us, we will probably not be doing it at all anymore. It didn't turn out very well for us in week 1. We had some partners that we played with that were either unable to put up their stack, or they dumped theirs over the step, or we dumped some over the step. We didn't design for it. So what we kind of had to do is hit the bump and have the tote slide off. And it actually works all right if you're working with a single tote. And we tried to help another team by putting 2 or 3 out there, and it just didn't work for us. So I think the big trick with it, and how teams are killing themselves right now, is being unrealistic about what they can do. And in any game where you're relying on other partners, whether they're your alliance or the opponents that you're playing against, even if it's not for win or loss, so to speak, if you are unsure whether you can do it or whether they can do it, you're probably better off not doing it. And so as of right now, unless somebody is willing to get us those 3 and we see them come up in the match, we'll make that audible to go put one up, but it's just not worth it. The risk is too great for most teams.
Interesting.
I'd
Ty,
actually.
go ahead, Evan.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you first. I insist.
All right. I'd actually disagree slightly that I think it is still worth it for a lot of teams, at least at the beginning. But once we start getting more towards the elimination matches or the playoff matches on Saturday, that if you haven't been successful with it, just give it up. Okay. At this point, just focus on showing what you can do and trying to demonstrate that you are a valuable alliance partner in eliminations. Because it's not worth anything in eliminations, and if nobody sees that you can do anything else, you may just drop off the pick list completely.
Yeah, that's what we did at the end. We had a terrible day on Saturday. We went in there, we were 38th out of 40 teams, and it was mostly because we were trying and failing to do co-op every single time. And then on Sunday we walked in, and I mean, if you can do co-op and you can do it fast, then go ahead, get those 40 points and be on your merry way. But if you're failing every time, you're gonna have a bad time. So on Sunday we walked in and we said, you know what, we're ranked 38th. The number of points we could theoretically get from that aren't gonna help us in our rankings enough to make a difference. So let's just go out there, show what we can do, and hope we get picked well. And we did that. We made our stacks. We went out and we got picked well, and we made it all the way to the finals.
Cool.
So I was going to add, I mean, we did basically the same thing. Second day, it was like, let it go, and we seemed to do surprisingly better because we were focusing on the plays that, I mean, from your playbook, your bread and butter, you go to the feeder station, you get your totes, you go place them, and there's no variability in the match, and that helps, I think, the drive team a lot, too. Less to worry about. In a game where you don't have defense and you don't really have to adapt to what's going on in the match, if you can just do your thing, it's a lot more reliable for you. And then I do want to say, though, it's like the Roboteers out at Rock City are the perfect counterpoint to the argument. They were putting up that 3-stack on the co-op. I mean, within 5 seconds after teleop started, they would get the 3 in auto, and then they'd have the co-op up there up top. If a team has the ability to get that 3-tote auto, and they've got a smooth way of putting it up, this can become almost seamless like it did for the Roboteers.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brandon.
I just got a quick one. So, I think what we're seeing too is just a level of parity between really good teams and teams that aren't really good, and that discrepancy is almost larger than it's been in a really long time. And part of it's because the design challenge was really difficult, and part of it is just the strategic difference between teams that maybe weren't as good shifting straight to defense is now shifting them to do other things that aren't defensive. Which is something they would have done in the past. So.
Yeah, that's true. This game is actually pretty hard, actually, all things considered.
Yeah, speaking of hard, what's extra hard is dropping the ball in limbs and how fast that can get you knocked out. If you screw up one game and, I don't know, 7 other alliances don't, then you're done. You're out.
Mm-hmm.
For example, 1768 in Reading, I'm speaking to Reading because I was there, they went for their 2-tote or their 2-container auto in their first qualification match, ended up unfortunately getting stuck on one container and spent a minute and a half trying to get unstuck, and that they just couldn't put up the 2 stacks of 6 with the container that they usually do, and out they went in quarterfinals.
Yeah, we saw that happen. I don't think there's been many events. Yeah, Auburn Mountain View. Several of the higher seeds went down. It's about consistency. There is no margin for error. And one thing that I want to mention with this that hasn't been mentioned before, there's no margin for error for the teams. There's also no margin for error for the refs. Right? We saw a situation. I think one. I don't remember the regional was the district was somewhere in Indiana, but there was an alliance that got a red card, because they tethered to their robot on the field to reset during a field timeout, and that is a red card per the rules, right? But it hasn't been previously. It was clarified that afterwards, with Q&A, that you need express permission to it, but you can do it and all this stuff. And it's like that red card, because it gave them 0 points in a match in the quarterfinals, that knocked them out. Whereas previously it would be, okay, that one was a loss, our bad, go back and win the next one. And that's it. It's impossible to come back from those kinds of issues. So Brandon, yeah, you guys also had a quicker exit than you wanted to week 1. Maybe you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, week 1 down in South Florida, we we got our alliance that we wrote down on paper together, and so whenever you can do that, you're pretty stoked. And we get into a limbs, and our first match went really well, and the second match, we were just trying to be quicker and score faster, and in the haste, Swamp Thing fell over, trying to cap one of our stacks, knocked one of our other stacks down, and that was it. You're in quarters. It's the average of your 2 matches. There's no room for error, and I think what that boils down to for teams as they kind of learn the game, which I think now we're through the first 2 weeks, teams are going to start learning and adjusting, is that you just don't take risks in the quarters. You don't run the 2 can autos if you don't need the extra cans. You don't go out and try and do some crazy maneuver with another team. You just build your stacks, get your cans on, and get to the next round, because at least in semis you have a little room for error.
Yeah,
that one extra match.
And I think the interesting thing talking about that with upsets in general, it's not so much that teams are upsetting other teams, it's teams upsetting themselves.
Yeah, it's very much about individual performance, or not individual, but performance of the alliance itself, as opposed to the other, the guys on the other side of the field.
Yeah, actually, Evan, if I kind of want to address your point you talked about with the no mistakes for referees.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always true, right? Referees, it's very little room for mistakes because everybody sees them and everybody talks about them forever on Chief Delphi if they happen. But my thought in that specific situation is that while the rule explicitly says that if you tether on the field, you get a red card, that's not what that rule's for, right? And as somebody who is a referee, I would never want to diss another referee, but that was a peculiar call. I would not have made the same call as he did, because that's kind of low, I feel.
I agree, and and I don't think there was really a warning given. It was an unfortunate situation. Now it's week 1, with a new game and fairly drastically rewritten rules. I mean, the whole no tethering wasn't actually an explicit rule with a penalty in previous years. This is the first year that it even had a penalty violation, at least that I understand. So, but that's kind of the point, right? Is there isn't this margin of error for referees to be able to make those. It's a pretty big mistake if you're going to do that, but it's just you go from costing them a match of a set that they probably would have won in 2 anyways, to knocking them out entirely, right? That's the magnitude that shifts a simple call that in the referee's judgment is not necessarily an easy call to make. But yeah, so I think we're gonna kind of move on.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Francis, you've got some stuff to add.
Yeah, just to sort of say to your point that you're all right, though, because I remember in the finals at our district last year, WPI, our team got red carded, and after the match, we tried to look for the red card and we couldn't find it, and we didn't actually do anything that was red cardable, and so we lost final match 2, but we came back, or it was semifinal, one of those elimination matches, and came back. So I don't know. Brandon, why don't you've had something to say. I know you want to talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the kind of theme of just lack of risk, and then you start looking at how you build an alliance, I look at look at the 254 alliance, or you look at the Rock City alliance, and you say, okay, we can easily outscore any other alliance that forms with our top 2 robots. So there's not much of an incentive for us to take the third robot out there and have them start, kind of crank. And you want to just have your third do something either very, very small and special or nothing at all. And I think that's what we're seeing with some of the more powerhouse alliances.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Let's we sort of transition into talking about third partners and what their role in the game is. It seems that, especially at a lot of events, it's either really, really, it's on a lot of alliances, it's either really impactful because they're at the lower end of the alliance, or they kind of don't do too much of anything because they're paired up with really good teams. What do you guys think?
It's it's interesting, and it depends on. I think it depends a lot on the event and the makeup of the teams there and the depth too. But we've seen.
Even at a district, you had it.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen teams at the powerhouse regionals, like Dallas and at Central Valley, picking third partners specifically to modify them to play this kind of one and done autonomous in preparation for finals where the winning actually matters. Is that? I kind of waffle on this. Last year, the third partner was really, really important to being able to get you that third assist. And this year, I think really it's a function of the resource limitation of this game, right? There's a game that's designed such that 2 really good robots on their own can use all of the resources available to them. And so there isn't, I hearken it back to 2008 a little bit. There's 2 balls on the field. What is the third robot going to do? Well, they just get to run laps, right? But the difference being that year you could pick any team with the best drivetrain and they actually were still scoring you points, whereas this year, if you've got a drivetrain and nothing on top of it that really works or doesn't jive with the rest of the alliance, you don't have a lot of utility there. And we see as more stacks go up, there's a lot less space. And so you start running, as Brandon said, there's a risk of actually that third partner being completely detrimental to the alliance by having them try to score because they either use up the scoring space on the platform or they accidentally knock something over or they're just getting in the way. So it's a little bit unfortunate function of the game design. I think that third partner role is going to evolve as we see higher level play towards championships and the fields start to get deeper.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think when you look at a third, what they can do, right off the bat, if you have, 2 fairly strong robots, you're probably looking at someone that can help get some center cans. And the thing with that type of mechanism is it's one of those things where it's just it's easy to copy. It's maybe not super easy to put onto a robot, but maybe you can take the time and have them sit out quarters and really invest the time into putting the can grabber on. There's just not a whole lot of utility, like you said, Evan, for third robots that don't stack or don't manipulate cans in an effective way. Otherwise, they're literally just a liability on the field.
Yeah, I think I don't know if anybody else has some thoughts on this. My last thing is that I think as we get towards championships with far deeper fields and much higher levels of play, you're going to start seeing that third robot be a specialist, maybe in doing the autonomous tote stack and freeing up the number 1 and 2 robots to being able to use their designed auto can grabber systems, or having enough trust in them to be able to make individual tote stacks and just getting points, even though they're not the ones that are dealing with the cans. So I think a lot of it's a function of how shallow some events are. And that will change.
Yeah, true.
I'm waiting for the litter blocker.
The big shield.
Denied.
Ty, actually, your alliance, you guys picked a third robot. It was Team 1474 from Tewksbury, Mass.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about why you picked them, because they weren't a robot that made big stacks. So why did you choose them? And they didn't sit in the corner, that's for sure.
No, they didn't. They definitely didn't make stacks, that's for sure. But they were able to move totes, and they were light. And they had a bunch of bare open aluminum, and we knew that, or we later on in the elimination rounds, or sorry, the playoff rounds, we realized that in order to beat 246 in their alliance, we weren't going to outscore them. We weren't going to be able to just put up more points than them. So we had to deny points from them. So what we did is we actually took up some PVC pipe from Wyndham Windup and made a Lexan hook, and we got some pneumatics going, and we're actually going to sacrifice their ability to open and close their claw so that they could actuate their tote grabber, or sorry, the container grabber. Then it just turned out that we just never really got the time. Unfortunately, our alliance wasn't powerhouse enough to let 1474 sit out a match. We weren't comfortable in doing that. They were consistently putting up 10, 12 points in just raw totes, and then the 4 points in the auto. So we weren't able to sacrifice those points in order to guarantee ourselves continuing on. So we never had the time to put it on, but it was there, and I heard we got to scare Overclocked with it pretty good.
Awesome. Let's sort of talk about that for a little bit. What do you guys think about basically gifting or working with your alliance partners to give them a new system and potentially having them sit out some matches like we've seen from some alliances already?
I think it.
Oh,
ahead,
so
guys.
all talk at once.
Let's go with Brando first. Actually, you're the guest. You get to go first.
Oh, great. I mean, so adding stuff to a third robot isn't anything new, right? I mean, this is something that a lot of experienced teams know and do. We actually have a term for it on the Neutrons. We call it cheesecaking. I don't know where it came from, but yeah, it's like our code name. I don't know where it came from, but
Do you know what it
cheesecake.
means?
Nope. I mean, we refer to that robot as cheesecakeable. And we have a cheesecake device that we build, and so for this year we have our cheesecake, which is a 2-can center grabber. Last year Citrus Circuits had a really awesome device that they would mount on a partner that would help them get those 3 assists. I mean, Citrus Circuits last year would 3 assists every single match, and you saw them climb to the top of the rankings at every competition we went to. Or they went to. So this is anything new, but I mean, this year finding out what that thing is because of the nature of the game, I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's the interesting where they actually put them on cheesecake. We actually they put the container grabber on the robots, and they get to drive around and try to get the containers, and that's great. And then there's things that I'm unsure about. For example, like 1114 made they took their ramp, they tied it to their third partner, they put their third partner in a corner, and then they went and played the playoff rounds. And that's they were able to do that. They picked them specifically for that, and they took them and they won it. And that was a choice in 1114. I'm absolutely not talking down to them. I was team. I don't know. It's you've got those super powerhouse teams that could just go and win a regional by themselves, because then it makes from the other side, from another country rather, and over the internet, it makes it look like they're not doing anything, as 1114 was doing so much when they were probably contributing to the alliance just as much,
But I think I do want to play devil's advocate there. While they are contributing as much to the alliance, or if not more, cheesecaking in this regard, I think might be a little bit less inspirational. When you give that robot some additional functionality that allows them to do something kind of cool on their own, that might be one thing. When you give somebody a ramp and say, here, hold my ramp, I'm not saying it's not thrilling to be a part of that alliance and to win, but I would rather cake than some of 1114's cheesecake, I think. Because when you bring that to a rookie bot and say, here, we're going to give you something to let you go play the game and help us out, or you can have a ramp and ride along with us for the win. No offense meant at all, but I think it's just that difference of giving them a role where they feel like they're being useful of their own accord somewhat.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's a little bit different just because of the way that the game works. You know, in 2013 with the shot blockers, you put a shot blocker on a robot and you say, you go out there and block as many shots as you can. And when they do that, they're contributing to the alliance throughout the match, right? And last year, it's like, okay, we're going to put this device on your robot and you're going to be our third assist. And, you know, we just need you, just do your job, you know, and your job is to be in that corner and make sure that ball comes in every single time, and don't let it go through until the robot's there, and this good stuff, you know. And this year it's okay.
Sit in the corner.
Well, it's not even just sit in a corner, right? It's we're talking about literally everything about the robot that they built doesn't matter. Everything that matters is the thing that I'm putting on them, and it's useful for either you're going to sit here disabled for the match, or I need you to run this one piece of code into auto and then get out of the way. And it's a little bit unfortunate. And I think we're going to continue seeing this through championships. I think hopefully by championships that the robot is going to be doing more than just sitting there. But
they definitely will.
It's, you know, it's not inspiring to watch. You know, and that, I think that kind of leads us into our next topic, which is are watching the best robots in the world do their thing, the same thing over and over and over again. Is that kind of boring? You know, I know the first time that I saw 1114 play, I was like, wow, 1114 makes this game fun to watch. And then I thought, no, 1114 is fun to watch. You know, because they're so good at this and they're really fast. And by the fourth or fifth match, it was kind of like, well, I wonder if they're going to screw up this time.
I'll never get tired of watching their robot drive around and just like. I
love the mesmerizing little swirls.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when I saw the robot for the first time, and a lot of other robots too, like 148 compete, 254 compete. I was at work when it was happening, and I literally like exclaimed out loud how cool it was. People around me were a little confused what was going on, but I mean, I think that the proof can be in the pudding when you watch. If you go and look at the Blue Alliance and watch the first finals match from CVR, you anticipate finals to be sort of like, you know, epic and cool, and everybody's pumped up and everybody's cheering, and it was as quiet as opening ceremonies in that match, and I don't know why. I think it's probably because, you know, of just the situation that came about.
Yeah, if you've got a game where the best two robots can sit in a corner until they've got enough gray, and then they move that gray somewhere else, and then they go back to their corner, then, you know, the most exciting part is that first 15 seconds when they're grabbing the containers off and things are moving fast. So for me, it's tough to get excited when you're watching robots just process totes.
That, and on top of it, it's tough to get excited when you know going into the finals, unless one of those robots breaks, we know who's going to win.
Yeah.
Brando, go ahead, Brando.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think you look at, everyone looks at games always from a couple perspectives. I mean, a lot of us are participating in designs of robots and stuff like that. So we look at 1114 and you go, wow, I can really appreciate the successes they've had in saving, or, you know, in designing this amazing machine. But then, you know, you go and you bring your lay person into the arena, your sponsor, parents, whoever, and it's, you know, the game is easy to describe, but it's just like you guys have been saying, it's just not thrilling, it's not exciting. Even at the high level, you actually find yourself hoping that someone knocks a stack down just because it's something different and something exciting that happens. And that's never...
Yeah, once again, 1114 delivered and did knock a stack over in finals, and then proceeded to still put up 3.
That's like the best case scenario, right? You get the
exactly.
fallen stack, and you get to watch them build another one. So,
yeah, I like how their second option is to build stacks faster.
Yeah,
like they go into the landfill, they build stacks faster than anyone else, and then if they screw up, they go over to the human loading station and then build stacks faster than themselves.
Yeah. It is pretty ridiculous, but I will actually give a little bit of a counter argument, which is that I think when the matches, it has less to do with the good robots
being boring and more to do with at a lot of these events, there's kind of been a clear-cut favorite, and unless they screw up, they're going to win. And when you start getting into alliances which are a lot closer in capability, it starts to become a little bit of a nail-biter. I remember watching the Reading, I'm going to say it right, the Reading finals, which Ty was participating in. And, of course, we were all rooting for him, and they lost, but they went to 3 matches. It was pretty exciting, but that was intense, right? Those finals were intense because you're like looking at one side and you're looking at the other side and you're trying to do the math and figure out who's ahead. Are they going to get the can on in the last second and all this stuff? So I would say that the boring part comes less from the robots and more from the fact that there's a couple teams that have just outdone everybody else at their event, and there's really nothing that anybody can do to compete and compare with them. I mean, at CVR, we saw in final match 2, Citrus and Cheesy Poos both had a little bit of trouble getting some cans, and as a result, they put up only 155 points, which is still like an entire stack ahead of their opponents in finals, who were very good opponents, right? They weren't they weren't shabby at 120 plus points a match, right? But you still, that kind of margin of error, and to still be able to be that far ahead, it's just, it doesn't bring any tension into the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, but sort of, let's change topics a little bit, because we've been talking about the best of the best robots and how they've been going. Brando, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are on what, I don't want to say the average team can do, but what most teams do, playing with the short stacks and the cans.
Yeah, I mean, in district, it's always funny. I mean, I've kind of had a nice year so far because I went down to South Florida with the team and we got to see, the big regional, 50 whatever teams down there. And then, I come back to districts, and districts are always a little bit different because there's just a smaller pool of teams. You have, less of those outliers on the bell curve of the really, powerhouse teams. But what we're seeing in New England is kind of this evolution where teams are realizing, and this is not a surprise to most people, but cans are very important. And the more cans that you put on top of things, the better chance you have of winning. There's a lot of risk in building a 5 or 6 stack. And the winning alliance in Reading, and even the finalist alliance in Reading, they were just relying on 3s and 4s, cans, and the occasional noodle here and there. But the winning alliance was consistently putting up 4 or 5 cans a match onto short stacks, and it was just a consistent way to score points. I guess you could call it less risky, just because they're not focused on building such a high stack and scoring it. So there are different ways to win. That's not going to beat an 11-14, but it will hold its own in competitions that maybe don't quite have that super upper echelon team there.
Yeah, that's true. I think you can sort of take a look at it and compare it to the 2 assist cycle from last season. Teams trying to, maybe they don't have the power to do big stacks, but they can still put up a lot of points and work to get more things done quickly if they play strategically and play smart.
The other thing it does, at least in finals, is it really puts pressure on the other alliance to make sure that if they're going for the big stacks, they had better hit it, because this team has points on the board. Or the other alliance, I should say. It's really been effective, I think, pretty much everywhere. That if you're not a robot that can build, a couple of 4, 5, or 6 high stacks with a can on top yourself, it's really beneficial, and it's a lot easier to build an alliance that can do, 4 or 5 smaller stacks. Now, the upshot is that it does rely on being able to get more cans from the middle, because you need more cans in order to make that balance out. But number of totes underneath a green can is number of totes underneath the green can, whether it's in a 6 stack or a 3 stack.
That's true. Cool. Well, as we sort of transition out of that, let's go into something a little bit more lighthearted. Naveed, you've got some hard numbers for us, some of the hard stats that you're well known for. Why don't you show us a little bit about your litter analysis?
Super exciting. Yeah, we got the week 2 counts. Can we get those up there? There's the week 1. So last week we saw an average death per match out here of about half a noodle per match, a little bit over that, and it drastically dropped. Can we get a week 2 up there? We are now down to about 0.36, and these numbers, bear in mind, are not necessarily extremely accurate. I ask volunteers to give me these numbers each week, and so we can see that the numbers are going down, which actually kind of surprises me. Out at Glacier Peak, litter was flying like crazy. The number 1 seed there had a human player who was almost consistently getting 9 or 10 noodles across a match, and showed why they were the number 1 seed. So there you go.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for your hard-hitting analysis, Naveed. As you know, you're only the best from GameSense. So let's go and talk before we end the show about the week that is on the way. Week number 3. We've got most of the high-level teams have already showed up already. Evan, why don't you give us a quick recap of some of the, or actually, Naveed, why don't you give us a little quick recap on some of your teams that are showing up this week?
Big ones this week, high profile. 469, of course, out in Michigan. Haven't seen them yet. Last year's World Champ winners. 2056 up north, showing off a new set of drive crew. 359 had an amazing run before. 1023 looking for a third banner. And 1024, the Kilobytes, had a great season last year, but couldn't quite cut the cake, and so looking for it this year.
Yep.
And they did already make it to finals.
As is their tradition.
Yep. 359 is going all the way to Australia. So, Aussie, oi, 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 and good luck to them down under.
Yeah. So, and don't forget, there's a lot of other great teams out there that have already played, that are starting to play their second and third events, especially in the district systems. So I would keep myself tuned to game day this week because we're ready to go. All right, well, we're getting to the end of our show this week, so let's end the show like we normally do with some shout-outs. Everybody's got a couple of things they want to talk about, so let's hit it over. Evan, go first. What is your shout-out this week?
All right. Favorite team of mine from California, repping the San Jose area again. They're going all the way to Orlando, 846, the Funky Monkeys. Last year they went to Buckeye Regional and got their very first regional win. So they're hoping that their out-of-state success continues. Great team. Really looking for it. I haven't seen the robot yet, but I know it's going to be a good one. And then 1717, the Penguineers. Great robots year in, year out. They always have more mechanisms than I can comprehend. So I'm really looking forward to see what they came out with this game. And I am expecting, per usual, a swerve drive.
Cool. All right, Ty, who do you got?
All right, I got 78 and 125, both going to the small yet incredibly competitive UMass Dartmouth district. 78 always takes one thing. They do it very well, and they do it very, very fast. Last year, those balls came out of their catapult like rockets. 125's already got a regional under their belt. They got their stacker working. They're working on a pretty good auto. Should be interesting.
Oh, you got some inside information, Ty, on T125? You know a guy?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, okay. All right, just checking. All right, Naveed, give us the best from your west side.
Actually, not all west this time. I've got actually 4522 Scream already played, looking great. Amazing young team. Excited to see them again this week. Putting up high numbers last time they played. 35-39 out in Michigan, biting Bulldogs. And got a shout out to our friends in Idaho, 21-22. Tater's gonna Tate.
All right.
Okay. Well, so my shout outs for this week go to Team 1884. They're the Griffins. They're from London, England. Yes, the England on the other side of the ocean. They come over to the East Coast every year. They used to come over to Worcester. Now they're going to New York City. Good luck to you all. And we can see the YouTube analytics. There's somebody in the UK who watches every week. I don't know who it is, but if it's you, thumbs up to the Griffins. And of course, 15-19, looking like the best team in New England so far, although we haven't seen 125 up here yet, so we'll see. You know, but good luck to them. I was really impressed with their showing out of the Grant State District, and we'll see what they can come up with for this year. So with that, Brando, take us home with your shout-outs for the week.
So I'm going to hit 3. I'm going to do an east, a middle, and a west. So we'll start in the east. I'm going to shout out to 1592. Saw them down in South Florida. They're a landfill specialist. I know for a fact they've been working on some upgrades, and they were really impressive by the end of South Florida, and that was week 1. They've had a little bit of time to work on stuff. Expect to see big things out of them. Going to the middle, 1296. That's the Full Metal Jackets. They're heading out of Dallas, which they're probably breathing a sigh of relief from. But they're a tetherbot, and they're again working on a lot of stuff. They're going to be really impressive. Keep an eye on them. And then going all the way to the west, this is not a team this is a team a lot of people know, but they definitely had a lot of higher expectations than they got at their first competition. 973, the Greybots, expect to see huge things from them too this week. Excited to see all three of those teams play.
Awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of our show. I want to give a big shout out. Thank you so much to Brandon Holley for showing up and coming and being on the show with us. You took the last 45 minutes of your unbagged time away from your team to be on the show with us. And so it really means a lot to us that you can come here and talk robots with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, you guys.
Cool.
It's been awesome.
Yeah. So before we end for the night, just a reminder to everybody, we're going to be having our Q&A session immediately following this for like 20 or 30 minutes. We're going to go dark for a few minutes and come back refreshed after that. If you're watching on YouTube, sorry, we don't put that up on YouTube. You got to watch live next week. If you want to ask a question during the Q&A, type !Q and your question in the chat on Twitch, and our chat bot will take it in and set it up for you. Or you can tweet to us with the hashtag FRCGS. All right. So with that, thank you everybody for watching. Big thanks to Brando once again. And we hope to see you guys here next week. And good luck at your competitions. Bye-bye now.